What if I told you that one of the most important networks in Black America wasn't really one network at all? It wasn't a political party. It wasn't a corporation. And it wasn't one fraternity or one sorority. It was thousands of individuals who belonged to different organizations, but kept ending up in the same rooms. Courtrooms, city halls, universities, corporate offices, newsrooms, boardrooms. They had different letters on their chests, but they often had the same problems to solve. So the real question isn't whether Alpha worked with Omega, or Kappa worked with Sigma, or one sorority worked with another. The real question is, did the people behind those letters build a network of influence bigger than any single organization? And how much of it can we still see today? When most people hear Black Greek letter organization, they think of college, the yard, step shows, probate, homecoming. But that isn't where the story ends, and that's what makes the BGLO unique from other Greek organizations. The entire structure of Black Greek life was designed to continue after college. Alumni chapters created permanent communities of professionals, similar to the structure of some lodges. And in 1930, the National Pan-Hellenic Council was created specifically to coordinate the interests of the Black Greek organizations. That matters. It means the organizations were separate, but never completely isolated. The Divine Nine didn't operate as one giant corporation, and not every Black politician or executive worked together just because they happened to belong to Greek organizations. No, that would be impossible to prove, and it would be wrong. This is an investigation of something more subtle. Did these overlapping professional networks make collaboration easier? And did those relationships actually matter to Black history? When separate units work together respectfully, how much more can they achieve? But the Divine Nine isn't the whole story either. There's a second layer of Black Greek life almost nobody outside it has heard of. In 1904, 2 years before the acclaimed Alpha Phi Alpha, the oldest of what became the Divine Nine, was even founded, a group of Black professional men in Philadelphia started an organization of their own. A doctor, a dentist, a pharmacist, led by Dr. Henry McKee Minton. They called it Sigma Pi Phi. Most people know it by its nickname, the Bull. And the Bull works differently from the organizations we usually think of as Black Greek life. There are no undergraduate chapters. You don't pledge as a student hoping to build on your potential to become that guy. You're invited after you already have become. For much of its history, it barely spoke about itself publicly at all. The fraternity didn't adopt a policy of even limited publicity until 1982. Imagine that, with social media secrets don't last 80 seconds, let alone 80 years. This wasn't a secret conspiracy. It was a professional network that simply didn't feel the need to explain itself because it simply did. The reveal that makes this worth your attention is this. Among its members are W.B. Du Bois, Ralph Bunche, later Eric Holder, and two names you already know from this series, Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis. The same man can belong to both worlds, the undergraduate brotherhood that helps launch a life, and the professional one that later recognizes what that life became. Hold on this thought a sec before moving on. It's the idea the rest of this episode keeps returning to. If you want to see how this network actually worked, civil rights is the clearest place to look at MLK Jr.'s involvement. Because the movement wasn't organized around fraternity membership. It was organized around something much bigger. Martin Luther King Jr. was an Alpha Phi Alpha man, but look at who he worked beside. Jesse Jackson, Omega Psi Phi, initiated in 1960 at the University of Illinois. Ralph Abernathy, King's closest colleague and the man who succeeded him as president of the SCLC, a member of Kappa Alpha Psi. Hosea Williams, a field organizer central to the Selma campaign, Phi Beta Sigma. Bayard Rustin, the chief organizer behind the 1963 March on Washington, and the man who introduced King to Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence, an initiated member of Omega Psi Phi himself, from his own undergraduate years at Wilberforce University. and John Lewis, chairman of SNCC, and later a 33-year member of Congress. Phi Beta Sigma, the same fraternity as Hosea Williams. They were not sitting around asking which organization had the most props. They were trying to change the country. Look at what just happened here. We started with unique fraternities. But once the mission got bigger, the fraternity labels got smaller. Alpha wasn't fighting Omega. Kappa wasn't competing with Sigma. These men were working inside something larger than any of their letters. The network may have been strongest exactly when nobody in the room was thinking about the network at all. And this isn't only a fraternity story. Black sororities built enormous professional and civic networks of their own. Alpha Kappa Alpha, Delta Sigma Theta, Zeta Phi Beta, Sigma Gamma Rho. Their members entered education, government, medicine, law, business, media, and community leadership. And just like the fraternities, they were never operating in isolation from one another. The real story was never Alpha versus Delta, or Kappa versus Omega. It was black professionals who happened to have different institutional homes, but who frequently lived and worked in the very same communities. In 1948, Delta Sigma Theta and Alpha Kappa Alpha, along with Zeta Phi Beta and Sigma Gamma Rho, pooled their money and legal talent to form the American Council on Human Rights. Leaders from all four sororities sat at the exact same table to fund a unified lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. Executives worked together to draft civil rights strategies, organize testimony for congressional hearings, and put joint financial pressure on federal lawmakers to pass civil rights legislation. Dorothy Height, national president of Delta, worked directly with Coretta Scott King, Alpha Kappa Alpha member, to coordinate major human rights campaigns. They traveled south together to support frontline student activists and co-founded the Black Women's Agenda to focus national policy, specifically on the intersection of race and gender. Prominent Zetas, including their 12th national president Dr. Lulelia Harrison, worked intimately with Height on the National Council of Negro Women's, NCNW, Executive Board. SGRO leaders partnered through the NCNW to spearhead vocational training and educational access campaigns, ensuring the economic tools to withstand white supremacist retaliation. They jointly organized rural Southern initiatives, such as the Mississippi Project, which provided clothing, childcare, and literacy training to families participating in voter registration drives. Politics is a little tricky to see, because politicians don't campaign as sorority members. They campaign as Democrats, Republicans, Independents. As mayors, state legislators, members of Congress, governors, judges. In fact, campaigning under your Greek organization can be seen as detrimental. But look underneath the surface, and you'll find members of different BGLOs sitting in the same legislatures, serving on the same boards, attending the same civic organizations, supporting the same causes, and sometimes while opposing each other politically. That's worth sitting with. Being a member of a Black Greek organization has never meant everyone shares the same politics similar to it's not about being in the same org. It's more about working to get done what needs to be done. In fact, that might be one of the most interesting parts of this whole network. The relationship doesn't require ideological agreement. A fraternity brother or sorority sister can disagree with you politically and still recognize a shared obligation to the same community. Business is where the hidden network idea gets harder to prove, and that's exactly what makes it worth taking a quick peek under the hood. Listing successful Black executives and declaring they were all connected because they were Greek is incorrect and not safe to assume. That's correlation, not causation. So the standard has to be higher. Did one member introduce another to an opportunity? Did they serve on the same board? Invest together? Mentor one another? Build something together? Consider Earl Graves Sr., an initiated member of Omega Psi Phi, who founded Black Enterprise in 1970. Over the following decades, that publication became far more than a magazine. It became a place where Black business success was documented, discussed, measured, and made visible. A network doesn't always give you a job. Sometimes it gives you visibility. Sometimes information. Sometimes just an introduction. Sometimes a lifetime partner. Sometimes it simply creates a room where people who'd otherwise never meet. During research, something surprising and unexpected was found. The goal was to look for organizations. Greek letters, however, stood out more than letters were people. And people are messier to classify than organizations. An alpha might work with an omega. A delta might work with an aka. A kappa might work with a sigma. They might disagree politically. They might have different traditions. They might even compete for members. But none of that stops them from sitting at the same table when the objective is bigger than the organization. Now let's slow down, because the word network can be misleading. I'm not suggesting there was a secret room where Black Greek organizations decided who'd become mayor, which company would get the contract, or who'd become president. There's no evidence for that. Not yet, anyway. I'm looking at you, Kamala. What the evidence does show is more ordinary, and maybe more powerful. People who shared educational experiences, professional aspirations, civic concerns, and organizational relationships kept encountering one another. And sometimes they worked together. Conspiracy theories are always fun, but evidence does not show that. That's not a conspiracy. That's social capital. That's movement building. So why call any of this hidden? Because it is easy to see the individual accomplishment, but not the infrastructure around it. It is easy to admire the building being built without recognizing its foundation. We see the politician, not necessarily the civic organizations behind them. We see the CEO, not necessarily the professional relationships that was leveraged to get there. We see the civil rights icon, not always the network of people who helped make the movement possible. And we certainly don't see their Greek affiliations every time they walk into a courtroom, a boardroom, or city hall. We see their title and position. The less visible the network becomes, the easier it is to assume it never existed. But that raises a bigger question. If this network was once such an important part of Black professional life, does it still work the same way? Do young Black professionals still see BGLOs as part of the path to success? Or have LinkedIn, social media, entrepreneurship, and the creator economy replaced some of the functions these organizations used to provide? Does relevancy still exist? And if the network still exists, is it still visible enough for the next generation to actually recognize it? Maybe the biggest mistake is thinking this story is about which organization had the most powerful members, or thinking about which organization had the biggest influence or made the most money. That's not really the story. The more interesting story is what happened when people with different letters entered the same institutions, faced the same barriers, and decided to work together regardless of letters. That understanding that our process may be different, but our goals are the same, and best way to achieve it is together. Because if one of the greatest impacts of Black Greek life wasn't the individual fraternity or sorority, but the connections between the people inside them, then we may have been measuring the wrong thing all along. We misunderstood what true unity can produce if allowed to prosper. And that leads to the next question. If BGLOs still have influence, why does that influence feel so much less visible today? Why does its influence feel like a shell of what it once was? Thanks for watching.